Now, we were discussing about how the Buddha became a Buddha. Now, before the Buddha became a Buddha, or before even Prince Siddhartha was born, he was in a Devaloka, a kind of heaven. It is called Tusita Devaloka. Tusita means the world of contentment. Tusita means contentment. Contentment means in that world you have no desires for pleasures or anything. Whatever they get, they are satisfied. That is contentment. Not going after anything. That is contentment. And was from there that he came to be born as Prince Siddhartha. So as the prince grew up, gradually, even after his marriage, and his marriage was not because he wanted to marry, but the parents wanted him to get married, and so he got married, just to satisfy the parents, because he even refused to get married. So the father became very unhappy. So to satisfy the father, he got married. And he was there for about how many years? He got married at the age of 16. And then he lived in the married life till about the age of 29. That was more than 10 years. About 13 years, 29. So, and he didn't have any children till that time. So most probably, he didn't have any sexual activities with that girl that he married. And that girl was also not interested in that type of thing. And most probably, when he decided to renounce the world, he must have told the wife that he was going to renounce the world. And he renounced the world only when he saw an old person, a sick person, and a dead person. And most probably, he told the wife that I am going to renounce. And then the wife must have told him, which is not recorded anywhere, but the most probable thing is the wife said, then give me a child before you go. So he provided the child, and that is how the child was born. And when the child was born, immediately he left the house. Because if he gets attracted to the child, it would be impossible for him to go out. So that's why he left immediately. And he thought. So anyway, when he saw the fourth person, or the fourth sight, which was a person who had renounced the world, who had given up everything, he began to see how normal people, being subject to old age, disease and death, they go after things that are subject to old age, disease and death, and as a result they suffer. But here is one person who has given up going after things that are subject to old age, disease and death. I will also, that is the right thing to do, and I will also be doing the same thing. And he went out into the forest to purify the mind. And there he came across Alarakalam and Uddakaramaputta, the most advanced meditators. And he learned from them. But ultimately he was not able to solve his problem. What was his problem? The problem is, the best way to call it is the insecurity of life. The insecurity of life. That life is insecure. Why? Because we can die at any moment. It is not only old people who die, even children can die. And a child just born can die. Or a child can die even before birth, while in the mother's womb. We cannot predict the time we are going to die. This is the insecurity of life. It is like a sword hanging from top. It can fall on your head at any time. So, life is a thing like that. And that is why life is insecure. That insecurity of life is what starts this thing called religion. But all religions, how do they solve that problem? They point to a kind of security. What is the security? Oh, there is a God who created the world, and we can pray to this God, and the God can come and help. Has anyone seen this God? No one has seen this God. But people believe in this God. Why? Because that belief gives them a feeling of security. which is not a true security. It is running away from the real problem of death into a dream world. I call it the escape from reality into a fantasy. Escape from reality into a fantasy. So this is why the Buddha never went after the Brahmins or the Mahabrahma or any of the gods, Shiva or Vishnu or any of those people. But he thought the right thing to do is to get away from this worldly kind of life which other people go after and begin to purify the mind. And so he went out. But when he learned from the two advanced yogis or meditators, he couldn't find the solution. So he went and started the ascetic life. And there he began to starve. Starvation can solve the problem. So he became like a skeleton. But the problem was not solved. Then he started trying to stop breathing. And he tried to stop breathing. But ultimately he fell down. He fainted. But the problem was there, not solved. So what can he do? So the only thing that he could do was he somehow woke up and ultimately he began to think, all these days I have been running after others to learn from others. I was trying to imitate others. And he thought, now I am going to do it my way. He remembered how he has been practicing the paramitas, the various qualifications to become a Buddha, through sacrifice, giving up everything. And now he remembered that when he was a child and when he became undisturbed by other people, he automatically entered the first jhana. Because he had been purifying the mind for many lives, not just one life. And that purity of mind was there, even at the time of birth. And so, he thought, this is the right way. I will be now practicing this giving up, letting go, which is the same thing as relaxation. Relaxation is not doing something. Relaxation is to stop doing anything. He stopped doing everything. He gave up and he entered the first jhana. And he came to the first jhana with the requisites, 5 requisites of the first jhana. Vitakka, vichara, piti, sukha, ekagrata. Vitakka, vichara means questioning. Vitakka means drawing a conclusion. I call it inquiry and inference. And the next one is priti, means a peaceful, pleasant state of the mind. And sukha is the result of relaxation of the body, the comfortable feeling of relaxation. And ekagrata is the perfect tranquility and stillness of the mind. Then he began to give up all that also gradually, one by one. He first gave up vitakka vichara, the inquiry and inference. And he entered the second jhana. Then he gave up the priti, that peaceful, pleasant state of happiness. Then he entered the third jhana. Then he gave up even the relaxation and comfort of relaxation. Then he entered the first jhana, where there was stillness of the mind. And he gave up that also to come to the sphere of infinite space. That is, his mind gave up the objects of perception. And he had only the process of perception without the objects of perception. That is the infinite space. He was aware of the infinite space. And then he gave up that infinite space also. And he remained with the process of perception, vijnananchayate. Then he gave up the process of perception also. And then he came to the nothingness, akinchanyayate. There is nothing. Then he began to realize that nothing was an object that he is getting hold of. And he gave up that also. And then there was neither perception nor non-perception. Then he gave up that also. And there came the cessation of sensation and perception. So, when the cessation of sensation and perception is similar to what today the biologists call hibernation. There are some animals who are supposed to stop the mind. So like that, Prince Siddhartha, who was doing this meditation, came into a state which we may call hibernation, which means that the mind is an activity of the body, not an entity separate from the body. And that activity stopped. So there are only what are called the metabolic activity in the body, which keeps the body alive. The activities that keeps the body alive. But there is no activity like consciousness. So that's why I translate that state as unconsciousness. And that is the meaning of avidya. Avidya is not ignorance of something like the Four Noble Truths. Avidya is simply a state of unconsciousness. A state which we may call hibernation. But a person does not remain in that state forever. And automatically a person comes out of it after some time. And when that person comes out of it, that person begins to become aware of how the mind or the activity called mind, how it behaves. So that awareness of how the mind behaves, or the process by which the mind ultimately creates a world and a self in the world, that process is what is called paticca samuppada. The word paticca samuppada means prati-itya samutpada. Prati-itya means when the conditions are there, it comes into being. Hetum paticca sambhutam hetu bhanga nirujjati. When the conditions are there, it comes into being. When the conditions are not there, it ceases to be. He saw that everything in the world is dependent on conditions. And the conditions that create the world that we are aware of is nothing but the process of perception. And he became aware of the process of perception. That is the meaning of avidya pacca sankhara. Avidya is that unconscious state. It is from a state of unconsciousness that the process of construction begins. Sankhara means construction. And in this process of construction, the first thing that comes up is sanya and vedana. Vedana, sanya. Vedana is, sanya is if we take the eye, the colors that we see is the sanya. And vedana is how we feel about the color, whether it is pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. Three feelings. That is Vedana. Vedana and the Sanya. Sanya is the color. When you think of the sounds, there are different sounds we can identify. There are sounds like a bus going, or we might hear the sound of a bird crying or singing or whatever you call it. You might hear a human voice and identify it as a human voice. So whatever sound that comes is the sanya. When you open the eyes, what we see is the color. And then we think of it, the sound, as something pleasant or whether it is unpleasant. So the pleasant and unpleasantness is what is called vedana. So those are the basic things, or the basic experiences from which we build something. So when we hear a sound, we might say it is the sound of a bird. So this bird is what we have built from the sound. And we even get the image of a bird. And when we see something with our eyes, that means when we see a tree, we have constructed the tree out of the colors that we see. So that is the construction. So when there is the construction, then perception is completed. We are able to differentiate the different constructs we have made and give meaning to that. That is perception. And when we have perceived, the object that is perceived, we give a name. When we have constructed an image, we give it a name. We might say, this is a bird, or this is a tree, or this is a leaf, or this is a flower. These are words that we use to name what we see. That is the entity and the identity. The entity is what we have constructed, and the identity is the name that we give. Nama Rupa. And by constructing these images, we construct the whole world through images. And that world, although we call it the world, the Buddha calls it the six sense fields, salayatana. The whole world is really the result of what we see, what we hear, what we smell, what we taste, what we touch. And all that is put together by the brain that is thinking. And that brain thinking is called mano. And that is called mano vijnana. So mano vijnana is really an interpretation of what we have seen. Interpretation of what we have seen. And according to the way we interpret, we gain a desire is aroused, or a hatred is aroused, or a fear is aroused, or a worry is aroused. All that is depending on the way we interpret what was seen or heard or smelled or tasted or touched. So once we are aroused emotionally, then the emotion is expressed in speech and action. And that is what we call karma. Karma is the expression of the emotion. But actually, the human being has this ability to stop expressing that emotion. Now, for an animal it is very difficult, because that is why a dog will bark at someone unknown. We cannot stop that bark. But the human being, even if someone unknown comes into the house, that human being, instead of getting, even if frightened or angry, that person can decide not to act angrily, not to speak angrily, and speak in a good way. That means he has the choice not to act emotionally. That ability to choose is what is called chetana, usually translated as volition. It is not volition, it is a decision to act. You might decide to act in the angry way, and then that becomes an akusala karma, a bad karma. But if you decide to act in a good way, then that becomes a kusala karma, a good karma. So the karma is depending on the way we decide. That is chetana aham bhikkave kammam vada. So karma is dependent on the chetana. So that is the important thing to understand. And so in any case, it is from a state of unconsciousness that the construction begins. And with the construction comes vijnana, perception. And with the perception comes what we perceive in the form of nama rupa. And once the nama rupa comes about, then we become aware of the world outside. And that is what we call cognition. Passa means cognition. But that is only becoming aware of the objective experience. But with that comes the Vedana. And Vedana is of three kinds: pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. The moment the Vedana comes up, then there is the reaction to the Vedana, which is the attraction to the pleasant, the repulsion to the unpleasant. And awareness of the existence of the neutral or neither pleasant nor unpleasant sensation or feeling. That is called tanha. Tanha is the reaction to the sensation. And that reaction is something that we personalize as mind. And that is the subjective experience. So the process of cognition only takes or makes the objective experience. It is that emotional reaction and the personalization that creates the personal subjective experience. And the subjective experience is personalized as mind. And the moment we call it mind, we cannot have a mind without an I. The I comes into being. That is the meaning of bhava. Upadana pacca bhava. The bhava is the mind creates the I. Now in Pali, the Buddha says, Etang mama, eso hamasmi, eso me attati. This is mine, this is me, this is myself. So the self has come into being through personalizing. And that self, then we begin to identify what is that self, where is the self. And when we examine it, ultimately we come to the body. The body is myself. So when the body becomes myself, we talk about the existence of the body, which is the existence of the self. But what is existence? Existence is being in space and time. So being in space is the amount of space occupied by the body. Being in time means the body has a past, present and future. And the past of the body is the birth of the body. And the future of the body is the death of the body. And in between, from birth to death, that is the aging process, jara. So we have jati, jara, marana, birth, aging and death. And that means that is the insecurity of life, of the self. The self is insecure, but that self is the thing that we have created with our own mind. The self was created by personalizing the reaction to sensation. The reaction is the tanha, and the personalizing is the upadana. And the upadana is the upadana khanda. The khanda is that process of perception. Which is explained as 5 constituents of the process of perception. So it is the 5 constituents of the process of perception that is personalized. And by personalizing that, the I comes into being. It is through personalizing that the personality comes into being. Personalizing creates the personality. The personality is the person, the I. And the I is identified as the body. And the moment the body is identified as the self, then the body begins to grow old, fall sick and die. And that is the insecurity of life. So the insecurity of life brings suffering. The suffering is the insecurity of life. That is the paticca samuppada.